Well, hey there, scholars. This is Dr. Franklin, and this is a mini lecture dealing with social media ethics. This is part two of a series that I'm doing on social media ethics. In this particular presentation, I will focus on key ethical issues in social media research. So, this particular presentation is going to have marked relevance to the cyber psychologists interested in collecting data from social media websites. The key ethical issues that I'm going to talk about include recruitment, privacy, anonymity, consent, terms of usage, and then finally, towards the tail end of the presentation, I'll talk about data usage and mining. Large technology corporations, for example, Facebook, Twitter, and Google, have powerful online preferences capable of generating research involving large and diverse samples beyond westernized detailed demographic profiles. The ethics of using research samples from these sites needs to be explored, given that many studies have been published by researchers scraping information from public sites such as Facebook and OkCupid. There were a lack of privacy safeguards that allowed researchers to do this, and this raises an issue about publishing research using identifiable data without informed consent. There is a lack of consensus around well defined guidelines for research involving social media, and as a result, researchers and institutional review boards may under or overestimate the potential risk of participants, which may cause cyber psychologists to be discouraged from performing online research or even submitting studies for review. As Belsinger has mentioned, ethical considerations in social media research are not ones that can be boiled down to a checklist. Instead, one must consider the whole research methodology, the topic under investigation, the time period in which the data is collected, the participants, the sensitivity of the content, and the possible consequences disclosure can have for research participants. In this mini lecture, I'm going to address some key ethical issues in social media research, chiefly recruitment, privacy, anonymity, consent, terms of usage, and data usage. Social media platforms enable investigators to recruit potential participants for research in the clinical and social sciences. Recruitment in online social media can have differences from traditional approaches to recruitment. In traditional recruitment, a key principle is justice, and recruitment is just when participants have an equal chance of taking part in research and the cost and benefits of the research are distributed fairly. A cyber psychologist must justify the inclusion and exclusion of research participants. Recruitment in online research usually involves participants who are self selected based on some attribute, and as a result, the traditional approaches to safeguarding justice may not be applicable because just participation is not possible. It is important for the cyber psychologist to consider ethical obligations for recruiting participants. Jelinas and colleagues have contended that privacy and investigator transparency are of seminal importance. Given that most social media researchers posted their private information in an effort to connect with others, it should not be assumed that they are giving consent to participate in research, even if their data is accessible by everyone on the web. Respect of persons is paramount when encountering a great deal of private information. Additionally, transparency requires that the investigator avoids deception and refrains from fabricating online identities to gain access to online communities. Recruiters should also proactively disclose their presence on social media when collecting information for recruitment purposes. Informed consent allows participants some control over their personal data so that they can restrict it. Traditional informed consent usually involves face to face contact between researcher and participants, but technological applications are usually devoid of that contact. Traditional informed consent may not be practical for social media research because the user's personal data is at times conceived as a part of the online data exchange. Traditional informed consent are usually replaced by terms of service or end user license agreements, which are usually hundreds of pages of license and consent forms that users do not read. The controversial aspect of social media research ethics is found in the ethical concerns surrounding collaboration between academic and corporate researchers. Unfortunately, users are often not directly informed about studies before or after they have been completed. Results from such studies have increasingly resulted in public outcry and a need for greater transparency and much consideration given to the impact of big data research on the users. The Facebook Emotional Contagion study was an online collaborative experiment between Facebook and Cornell University that involved 700,000 users. The experiment involved the manipulation of the Facebook newsfeed of the uninformed by way of filtering out particular posts with positive and negative words. After manipulating the feed, an analysis of the emotional content of the participants' post was performed to assess whether exposure to emotional content would impact participants. Facebook and Cornell University found that basic emotions were contagious, though the effects were small. The reactions of the international news media was unenthusiastic, as many believed that users could have been harmed, and some questioned the procedures used to authorize the research. Other concerns abounded, such as the violation of identity based norms and the exploitation of users disclosing on social media when they could not control the ways in which personal data is displayed. Selinger and Hartzog contend that these ethical considerations should have been discussed before the study and not afterwards. Some researchers contend from a consequentialist perspective that the benefits of the research outweighed the risk. Pushman and Bozag summarize the pros and cons of the Facebook emotional contagion study along with 6 different argument themes. Feel free to take a look at your textbook for more information on this. Distinguishing between public and private data may not seem as simple as it sounds. This is particularly the case because most users have some of their basic information available publicly, and at least some of that data is potentially indexed by external search engines. Schultz and Mason in 2012 wrote some criteria that help cyber psychologists analyze the content of the public data along the lines of group size, communicative purpose, social status of the community, intended audience for distribution, and other criteria to distinguish between public and private data. To some extent, public versus private considerations reflect anonymity, and the strategy is considered best for maintaining ethically responsible research. It's common in social media research to anonymize data, but it's important to keep in mind that sometimes conflicts arise when the social media platform views anonymizing data to be a violation of the terms and conditions of usage. For example, some platforms like Twitter think along those notions. Sometimes researchers' best attempt to anonymize social media data falls flat, and such was the case with the Harvard and UCLA NSF funded research study titled Taste, Ties, and Time that involved 1,700 downloaded Facebook profiles in 2008. The purpose of the study was to model the social network dynamics of a large group of students to pose questions about the relationships between social networks, online and offline. The Taste, Ties, and Time research team, or T3, made attempts to protect the identities of the participants by removing students' names and ID numbers from the data set. They also delayed the release of the participants' cultural interests, and when they released the data, they had other researchers agree to terms and conditions for usage. Unfortunately, Harvard's IRB approved a protocol where students were not informed that they were research participants. Furthermore, this study became a public scandal when Michael Zimmer from the University of Wisconsin identified the dataset as coming from Harvard. Zimmer identified the ways in which the social media researchers failed to protect the user's privacy. They failed to protect the user's privacy along the following lines: the vast quantity of data collected, inappropriate access of accounts, unsanctioned secondary use of data, and errors in personal data. In regard to hacked sites and data that is publicly available online, Zeller believes that social media researchers are responsible for establishing a dataset's origins and the nature of the consent given by the users. Many popular websites have been hacked, such as Ashley Madison and Snapchat. There is still a lack of agreement among cyber psychologists and other social media researchers about whether gathering publicly available data should be considered as a part of a regulatory definition of human subject research. There is also disagreement about whether informed consent and institutional review board review should be required. Waskell and Douglas in 1996, they pointed to the import of social norms and praxis to give direction to the discussion of private versus public information by using an everyday discussion in a park example to illustrate their thoughts. For some, the mining of public data is not a violation of social norms and archival forms of research. Kosinski offered conditions for the use of private user information that is available publicly without consent, which includes the following. It is reasonable to assume that the data was knowingly made public by the individuals. Data is anonymized. There's no interaction with the individuals in the sample, and no information can be attributed to a single individual. Finally, given that virtual communities and social networks are increasingly assuming and consuming facets of people's lives as a part of our private and public extended minds, ethical guidelines for social media research need to be re examined and compared to traditional face to face approaches. Schultz and Mason outlined a framework to guide social media researchers. For Schultz and Mason, the human subjects framework for studying cyborgs includes three dimensions. These three dimensions are entanglement, interaction/intervention, and privacy. These three dimensions need to be considered together prior to deciding on whether the research deals with human subjects. Researchers are encouraged to rate each dimension on a low to high scale, which will hopefully result in a more holistic treatment of the social and technical issues surrounding social media research.